let's just kind of dive right into it. Obviously, Brent Venables in Oklahoma had the annual ChampU barbecue weekend, the biggest recruiting event of the year in Norman, Oklahoma, just went down. So let's just kind of kick things off, man. Obviously, before we kind of get into the barbecue stuff, we had two commitments that just came on. Just came online about an hour or so ago. Obviously, Oklahoma getting the commitment of North Carolina linebacker James Nesta, two-sport athlete that's going to be playing both football and baseball here at the University of Oklahoma. And then just a little bit further south down I-35 in Fort Worth, Texas, Oklahoma gets the commitment of three-star wide receiver Dozie Ezukanma. So, Cab, just talk a little bit about these two and what Oklahoma's getting.
James Nesta is a two-sport star. Plays football and baseball. He's a linebacker, and I think whenever Brent Venables looked at James Nesta, he saw quite a bit of himself in that tape and just the mindset and the way that he plays. But James Nesta is a talented linebacker. He's not. I think he's a three-star prospect. But when you look at his film, he's got a lot of upside as far as just his overall athletic ability and his instincts. He's got good speed. And then on the baseball side, he throws a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. And Skip Johnson and the baseball staff are really excited about what they're getting with him on that as well. And then with Ezukanma, I'll be honest, this was a surprise to me whenever this came up about 5 minutes after Nesta announced this evening, and talking to a few other people that they were also surprised. I don't think the timing of this was put out there in advance by Ezukanma at all, and so definitely a welcome surprise to get a wide receiver that OU has been high on as far as his upside. If the name sounds familiar to OU fans, it's because his brother Eric is a former Texas Tech wide receiver and current Miami Dolphins receiver. So there's a lot of connection there as far as OU's familiarity with the family and everything. But in Dozie, you get a guy who's got good speed, he's got good size, and has a really good chance. When you pair him with the other receivers that OU has committed and that they have on the board right now, it makes up a pretty good wide receiving core. And I know that when you look at what Dozie brings to the table, there was a lot of promise there just as far as how he fits in Levy's scheme and what he can bring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Dozie Ezukanma, obviously, another wide receiver and, another feather in the cap for Emma Jones. So anytime that you're able to, keep the brothers in the family, keep them, in your wide receiver room, that's going to pay dividends for Oklahoma moving forward. And like you said, just a nice compliment with this kid to go along with, current wide receiver commitments, Zion Kearney and Kelly Daniels, the speedster out of Franklinton, Louisiana. So again, Parker Thune tweeted out just a little while ago for regarding James Nesta. Worked out for the LA Dodgers a little bit earlier this morning. Commits to the University of Oklahoma to play football a little bit earlier this afternoon. So all in all, not too bad of a day for James Nesta, the four-star linebacker out of Cornelius, North Carolina. But let's recap some barbecue from over the weekend. I think the minute Cap, that Oklahoma's SEC schedule was released, many people's first thought, yours and mine included, was the defensive line and how the Sooners need a massive upgrade at that position, both talent-wise, but also from a depth standpoint. We saw that it was one of, if not the biggest position group of guys on campus this past weekend for the barbecue. So what can you tell us about that group of defensive linemen, and how much of an impact did Todd Bates and Brent Venables make?
Going into the weekend, there was definitely a lot of pressure on the staff to make an impact with the recruits that came in. There was a lot of strategy involved as far as who they brought in and when. David Stone was on campus quite a bit in the days leading up to that. He was obviously a big part of the process in the weekend. You're meeting guys like McKinley and Nigel Smith as they came in. From what I've heard coming out of the weekend, OU fans have to be very encouraged with the progress that was made. And when you talk to the various recruits, in that defensive line group in particular, it sounds like OU hit all the right notes. They did all the right things, said all the right things. They put themselves in a really good position with guys like McKinley. And so coming out of it, eh, when you ask yourself, did OU do what they wanted to? Did they do what they had to? Was it a successful weekend? Even though you didn't come away with any commitments, which I know OU fans are really clamoring for and really hoping for, I think you did all that you could do if you're OU
Mhm.
to make sure that when the time comes for this particular group to make decisions, that you're right there, if not the leader for many of these guys.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that was kind of the main theme that we saw a lot of people on social media over the weekend talking about. Florida is lighting it up on the recruiting trail. They're getting commitment after commitment over the last 48 to 72 hours. Texas was able to nab one or two guys. So people were basically saying, this is our biggest recruiting, weekend of the year. Where are all the commitments to join the 2024 class? And let's not forget, guys, Brent Venables' philosophy, obviously, once you commit to play at the University of Oklahoma, no no further visits are allowed, but by any of these recruits that decide to join the Oklahoma family. So let's not press the panic button anytime soon. This is something that we've seen from Brent Venables, just from the last recruiting cycle, where it kind of starts off a little bit slow over the course of the summer. Once you get into the later part of June, early in July, that's when momentum really starts to pick up. And there's one thing that we know about these guys as recruiters on the staff is that they close in a really big way. So long way to go, but Oklahoma did do themselves a really big favor with a lot of these guys putting themselves in a good position as we sit here about 5 months away from National Signing Day. So let's talk quarterback position here, Cap. With Michael Hawkins already committed in the 2024 class, the Sooners had another 2024 quarterback on campus over the weekend in Samaj Jones, the four-star dual threat kid out of Philadelphia. Talk to us a little bit about Samaj and how realistic that is for Oklahoma and what kind of player they'd be getting.
So with Samaz Jones, you're getting one of the faster quarterbacks in the country. He is an incredibly athletic prospect.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also very skilled as a passer. And when you look at his tape, it rivals some of the better quarterbacks that are even higher ranked than he is as far as the kind of touch that he has on the ball, the ability to deliver it at all the different levels in an offensive scheme. He's very 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 skilled, and one that I would expect to go higher in the rankings depending on a few different factors in his recruitment. But I would definitely put him up there from a skill level with guys like Michael Hawkins and quarterbacks who are maybe a little bit more well known to OU fans because part of it is he's on the East Coast, so he's just not that familiar of a prospect for OU fans. But you're getting an incredibly athletic guy who's very fast, who's very quick, and has the kind of passing skills that you don't always see in guys that are kind of that run first option. But as far as OU's chances to get Samaj Jones, going into the weekend, talking to sources, the feeling was there was a chance that OU could close the deal this weekend, if not shortly after. There's also a feeling that the longer this goes, the better the chances are that West Virginia might have to come in
Mm-hmm.
because that's seen by many as OU's greatest competition for his services is West Virginia for a number of reasons. But the longer this goes, I think that you'll see West Virginia counter what OU was able to do this weekend because all reports indicate that OU made a really big impact with his family and with
Mm-hmm.
Jones himself about how he fits in the Levy scheme, and I know that some might question the fact. Well, you've got Michael Hawkins already committed. You got Sperry committed for the 25 class. You got Jackson Arnold already on campus. So what about
Mm-hmm.
competition? Well, the other thing that you're getting with Samaj Jones, if he does sign, he is a competitor through and through. He is not afraid of who might be on the roster. He's very confident in his own abilities. He's got what the proverbial dog mentality that people talk about. That's definitely who he is, kind of personified as far as just how he goes about his work and handles his business. So I would definitely like to see him in this class, just based on what I've seen of his tape and what you know of him as a prospect, just from that mindset perspective. But again, I think as we go through the week here, the longer this goes, I think West Virginia has a better and better chance. And ultimately, though, if you were to ask me today, I think that OU ultimately will end up signing him.
Yeah, the Sooners do stand in a really good position, with the quarterback, and obviously, from some of the conversations, that we've had with some sources, Cap, that's probably one of the most appealing things that stands out to me about Samaj Jones. Not just the talent on the field, but the mindset that this kid has between the ears. Where he's got guys telling him, Michael Hawkins, Oklahoma already has a quarterback in the boat for 2024. Why would you want to go to a place like Oklahoma? And because this kid is so competitive, because he's so determined. He's got such strong willpower. He doesn't care the fact that Michael Hawkins is already in the boat for Oklahoma. He relishes the competition, and he has, all the belief in his talents that he can come in and compete for that starting job. Once not just Dylan Gabriel's gone, but once Jackson Arnold's time is over at Oklahoma. So it's going to be really fun to see how that shakes out. Um, you know, go fast forward one more year to the 2025 class. We did get a little bit of news from earlier yesterday. Kevin Sperry, the Oklahoma 2025 quarterback commit, made the decision that he is going to be transferring to play the remainder of his high school career at Carl Albert up in Midwest City. Um, Cap, what kind of impact, if any, does this have on OU's 2025 class? Obviously, losing a guy, your quarterback commit that is based down there in North Texas, has really good ties to the Dallas, Fort Worth area. Now he's deciding to take his talents up here a little bit further north, playing ball in the Sooner State. What does this do for Oklahoma's 2025 class, if anything?
I think it's got a chance to be very impactful for OU's 2025 class there, and especially when you consider that at Carl Albert alone, there are a number of targets in the 2025 class that
Mm-hmm.
that are considering OU that OU has very high up on the board. Not to mention Xavier Robinson in the 24 class, who Kevin Sperry is already developing a relationship with, already getting to know. If you see some of the activities that they're taking part in with unofficial practices and get-togethers as a group of teammates there, of new teammates. So I think no, and just seeing Kevin Sperry and how he's gone about recruiting kids since his commitment, he's going to be very active. He's going to be very vocal as far as hey, come join me, come do this thing with me. Let's go and really make an impact. And so I think it could be very very impactful. And the extent to which that's effective is going to depend on a number of things, I think, and it's going to come down to, can Kevin Sperry come in and develop those relationships, and what kind of effect will that have over the next year or so. But Kevin Sperry, I think, has the kind of mindset and the personality to really be that face of the class, that Pied Piper that can really pull guys in. And you saw that at some of the camps that OU put on over the last couple of weeks too, because he made an
Mm-hmm.
effort to be there at all five of those camps. You had a lot of OK Preps kids that were there, and it never failed. Every time that he was interacting with kids at that camp, and especially the receivers and guys on the offensive side of the ball, there was a fascination with Kevin Sperry and his ability and his charisma and personality, just because of how good a talent that he is, first of all, but he's also got that kind of personality that kids are drawn to in a lot of ways. So uh, time will tell, but I definitely think it's got a
Mm-hmm.
chance to really help OU with a lot of their OK Preps targets in the 2025 class.
Cap, let's talk running backs here for a second. Obviously, Oklahoma has had, all three of their main running back targets on campus over the last 4 to 5 days, and Xavier Robinson, Caden Durham, and then obviously Taylor Tatum. Now, we heard a lot of good things coming out of Xavier Robinson's camp, and we still continue to do so over the last 24 to 48 hours, and then during the course of the ChampU barbecue weekend. Caden Durham, Taylor Tatum being on campus, this was really going to be DeMarco Murray's best opportunity to make a splash and really kind of get these two kids, if not both, at least one of them on board to join this 2024 class. And we heard a lot of really, really good things coming out of Norman Saturday night with regards to Caden Durham. So I know the social media was kind of on fire early Sunday morning, and everybody was kind of waiting to see, like, okay, I know that USC has made a huge run with Taylor Tatum, the number one running back in the country out of Longview, Texas. And then we wake up this morning, and it kind of feels like Oklahoma, through the efforts of DeMarco Murray and Jeff Lebby, but also on the baseball side of things with Skip Johnson and his staff, Oklahoma was able to really make up some ground with Taylor Tatum over the last 24 hours. So just talk a little bit about the running back position and where you think Oklahoma stands right now with those three.
Yeah, this has been probably one of, if not the position where you've seen the most shifting as far as OU's momentum over the last 3 or 4 days with all of their
Mm-hmm.
top targets in Robinson and Durham and Tatum and Tatum and Robinson in particular. But start with Robinson. He was on campus middle of last week. He is somebody who, if you go back, 2 or 3 weeks ago, was more likely to go to Ohio, or not Ohio State, but Iowa State, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of momentum towards him choosing the Cyclones and ultimately ending up there. And then through a couple of different factors, but a lot of DeMarco Murray's efforts and OU's efforts at really prioritizing that relationship, that momentum started to shift towards OU, and you saw that really heat up around 2 weeks ago, and really continued into that barbecue visit weekend to the point where Xavier Robinson, at this point, I believe it's just a matter of time before he commits to OU, and that was definitely the feeling going into the weekend. You've seen a lot of predictions from different recruiting writers and experts that would back that up. But at this point, again, I think OU fans have to feel very good about where OU stands with Robinson. With Durham, LSU the has been the primary competition there for quite a while. With their track program, they present a lot of different things that are attractive to Caden and his family. So, and he's kind of on a similar timeline as Xavier Robinson almost, as far as, when you look at 2 or 3 weeks ago and how LSU was definitely in the picture and thought of by many as the leader for his services. DeMarco Murray and OU have slowly chipped away at that, and to the point where going into the barbecue weekend, OU had some work to do, I think, to really get back in that lead spot. But they were right there, and then based on how the weekend went, the consensus from the people that I'm talking to is that OU has put themselves in a really good position. And for Caden Durham and Michael Patterson McDonald and David Stone and Xavier Robinson, these are guys that grew up together, that have known each other for a really long time. And OU is really pushing that as far as, uh, you know, as a way to really gain momentum with this group and Robinson and Durham in particular. And the relationship that Murray has built with both of those guys is definitely showing through here and making a big impact. So it's really interesting just to kind of watch how that has shifted. Those two things have obviously shifted, but when you look at what's happening with Taylor Tatum, that is a whole nother level, because when you when you think about yesterday, and I told some people earlier today, as of 9 o'clock last night, roughly around there, Tatum was going to USC, and and everybody that I had talked to, sources at OU, sources on the USC side, and just about anybody that you would talk to, I think would
Mm-hmm.
basically tell you that USC was in the lead at some level, and for a number of reasons. But apparently, there was a lot of conversation. The OU baseball staff got involved and made a pitch to Tatum that really resonated with him and his family, and to the point where, to the point where now, when you look at it and you talk to sources, Tatum is very much trending towards OU, and OU is considerably the leader at this point, which is wild to think about. Now, I will say, uh, the longer this goes on, if it stretches past, say, this weekend, I think that USC is going to have a chance to counter, obviously, in the coming days. And you have to be
Hmm.
aware of that if you're an OU fan, because if there's one school that Lincoln Riley does not want to lose a recruiting battle to for an offensive skill player, it's probably OU. And just based on the history there, and just a pride factor and nothing else. So we'll see what happens, but I think this decision is going to come down pretty quickly based on what some others are saying, and what you hear from around Tatum and his family. So uh, again, if you want to talk momentum and being in the best position possible, and doing everything that you possibly can do, OU has done that and more, as far as pulling Tatum back from what seemed like an inevitable decision for USC.
Hmm. One final one here for you, and then we'll transition away from the running back position. Obviously, it's hard to kind of forecast and project what the running back room is going to look like in the 2024 season. But obviously, you just base it off of eligibility. I think that it's probably a fair assumption to think that going into next season, 2024, you're still going to have Barnes, you're still going to have Sawchuk, Caleb Hicks, Dalen Smothers. You're going to have four quality running backs in that room. So Oklahoma, with them, being in such good standing with three of these guys in Robinson, Durham, and Tatum, are all three of these guys a take for Oklahoma? Is it first two on board? Obviously, Taylor Tatum being the number one, excuse me, running back in the country, he's going to have a spot. But is this basically we're interested in taking all three, or is it the first two in the boat type of scenario for DeMarco?
At this point, OU is, and this is what I believe just based on talking to various people. OU is not going to say no to either Tatum or Durham, and Xavier Robinson has a spot no matter what. If he decides to come, then you're not going to turn him down as one of the top in-state prospects, and a very good running back in his own right.
Sure.
So my thought has been, and I think this is echoed by quite a few people, just depending on who you talk to, but if it's a situation where all three decide to come to OU, there are roles that OU can create for all three of them at different points. Obviously, you've got Tatum and Durham as the running backs, but you have a guy like Robinson who has the capability to play not only running back but also H back, or some position like that, depending on what Levy can work within his scheme. So there's room in the class, and if you look at that room and kind of forecast it out over the next 2-3 years, there's definitely a good fit for taking that many in this class and then maybe scaling back what you take in 25, depending on how the numbers
Hmm.
work out and everything else. But just because of the talent represented there, and a guy like Robinson who is very skilled in his own right, but also uh, is that kind of the in-state prospect, and you don't want to damage relationships by pulling a scholarship and not taking a guy after you've made him a priority and offered him. I don't think there's any way that OU turns down any of the three if they decide to say yes. And they'll
Hmm.
figure out the numbers on the back end.
Well, if there's one thing that we know, especially with OU making the transition into the SEC in 2024, playing that type of physicality in that schedule, game after game, week after week, you can never have too many running backs in the room at your disposal for Jeff Lebby and DeMarco Murray to have at their disposal. So, let me give you another one here, Cap. Obviously, offensive line, Oklahoma going into the SEC, the trenches, that's absolutely pivotal, being able to hold your own and dominate like we've seen from Georgia and Alabama, over the better part of the last 10 to 15 years. You've got to be able to hold up and dominate in the trenches. We've had a lot of recruits on the offensive line in Norman over the past couple of weeks, but we haven't really heard much chatter from inside the program. When do you think Oklahoma fans will feel better about offensive line recruiting for the 2024 class? Because they just got three-star Isaiah Autry committed at this point.
When you look at the visit schedule for a lot of these guys, and right
Mm-hmm.
now, if you're looking at the OU board, it's guys like Grant Brooks and Casey Poe, and a few others that are in there. You got Bennett Warren as well. Those are the main ones I think you're going to have some kind of clarity on sooner than later. And when I say sooner than later, and answering your question specifically, I think it's going to be sometime in July where the picture becomes clearer for OU and where they stand with some of these top prospects. Um, I don't know. I think if you're an OU fan, you would have liked to have seen a little bit more momentum and clarity coming out of that July 9th or June 9th visit weekend, right before this previous weekend at the barbecue, where they had a lot of those offensive line commitments, or not commitments, but the prospects and recruits in, trying to really focus on them during that weekend. But
Hmm.
without that, there's a lot. There's just a lot of different moving parts as far as visits and momentum for guys like Poe and Warren in particular. And we're going to have to see how it plays out. Casey Poe has been on campus here over the last day or so. Been at Warren. OU's primary competition there is Michigan. For Warren, I from what I've heard, OU did a really good job with him over the weekend because he was at the barbecue this weekend. So
Hmm.
OU did a really good job with Warren to the point where if he's not having OU as his leader currently, I think they're really close in there with Michigan. So there's work to do still for Bill Bedenbaugh, but I think sometime in July you're going to feel
Hmm.
better about that, or at least we're going to know where OU stands more so than we do now.
Sure. Sure. One last question for you, Kat, and then we'll get you out of here. Looking at this class as a whole, obviously you've got your quarterback and Michael Hawkins on board. I think OU currently sits right now at 8 commits in the class. Currently, the number 16th ranked class nationally in class rankings according to On3, which is actually ranked eighth in the SEC rankings right now. So obviously, still some work to go. You've got David Stone. That's the holy grail. That's the most highly coveted recruit that Oklahoma simply has to land in the class of 2024. What are realistic expectations for how high this class can finish once we put a bow on it here in a few months?
I think the ceiling is probably top five, probably number five, and then the floor is probably eight or nine, depending on where things fall. And in order to be in that top five
Mm-hmm.
or maybe push into top four, you've got to have guys like McKinley and Terry Bussey and some of these other really highly rated guys fall your way if you're OU. So barring that, if I had to guess, it's going to be somewhere in that 4 to 8, 5 to 9 range, depending on who you fall. And if I had to really pick a number at this point, I'd say somewhere around seven, just to find a happy medium in there because uh, there's a lot of different ways this could go, and we'll have to see how it plays out. But that's my best guess based on current information.
Cool. Rapid fire. One last question here for you, Cap. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk on social media over the last week with the 2024 schedule for the inaugural season for OU going into the SEC. It was released. Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina coming to Norman. You've seen people mostly on the positive side of the spectrum, but you've also seen maybe a few people that are a little bit nervous. I don't know if scared's the right word, but anxiety is a little bit higher knowing what's coming down the pipeline for Oklahoma. Cap, what are just your overall initial thoughts on Oklahoma's transition into the SEC and how competitive do you think we as fans should expect Oklahoma to be? Because it's going to take some time. I think we're fooling ourselves to expect that Oklahoma is going to just go in to the SEC right away and compete for 9-10 wins a season. It's going to take a little bit of an adjustment period, especially in the trenches. You've got to build up that quality depth.
Personally, I welcome the increase in the level of competition personally, and I think it's going to be far more entertaining just from a fan standpoint to watch these games against the likes of Tennessee and Alabama and South Carolina versus the typical Big 12 home schedule that you've seen, or even the full schedule that you've seen in conference for quite a while, basically ever since Nebraska and Colorado and Missouri left the conference. So uh, I'm excited just from a fan standpoint, from a competitive standpoint, and what you can expect for OU on the field going into the SEC. It's definitely going to take
Mm-hmm.
some time. Uh, I I would expect there to be more losses, but I think the season will be more fun overall. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think that
Sure.
applies to not just the fans, but also the team. because one of the reasons that recruits have been drawn to the SEC is that pull of playing against the best week in and week out. And I expect OU, if you look at historically what OU does, they typically rise to the level of their competition, and I expect that
Hmm.
to hold true here. And so, definitely important to close on some of these defensive line recruits and get more up to SEC level standard there in that position group in particular. And I think it's going to take, even if they sign this new class, you sign a lot of these guys in this new class, it's going to take them a year or two to adjust and develop to the point where they make the kind of impact that can change a game at an SEC level. But I think overall you have to be really excited about it as both a fan
Hmm.
and as somebody on the team about the prospects of it. And yeah, you might end up with more years than you're used to, where you lose 3 games or so. But those years where you're getting 10, 11 wins and competing for a conference title, I think is going to be even more entertaining than it ever has been, just based on who you have to
Hmm.
beat to get there.